Hello viewers, welcome to Radio Metro Mail. You are watching Catch Up on Radio Metro Mail. I am Emamul Haque, your host for today's program. In Catch Up, basically we invite people, those are interested in politics or wish to be in politics, or those who are interested in engaging themselves in civic engagement activities in the community. Ontario will have its election on 7th June of 2018, few weeks ahead. So there are three major parties: Liberal Party, New Democratic Party, or mostly known as NDP, and PC Party, Progressive Conservative Party. They are the main actors in these upcoming elections. But there are some other independent party and small parties as well. Since, while we are very close to the Ontario election and candidates started knocking on our doors already, in Catch Up today, we have a very special guest with us.
Rima Berns McGown.
We can call you Rima.
Please Rima with
okay.
Rima.
She has got the nomination from the NDP, New Democratic Party, and her riding is Beaches East York. So, dear viewers, let's start with Rima. She is our guest today, and we are very welcome to our program on our show.
Thank
you. We are very pleased to have you on our radio program.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, for our audience, I think if we start with, if you like to introduce yourself, and then if you just give us some idea about your riding, that Beaches and East York.
With pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Assalamu Alaikum. It's a real pleasure to be with you today and to have an opportunity to introduce myself, to let you know a little bit about who I am and why I'm doing this, what I'm all about. So, I never expected to be doing this. I'm an academic. I was teaching at the University of Toronto at Mississauga, but I have to start a little bit farther back. I was born in South Africa. I come from a mixed background, and my parents came to Canada when I was almost 5 years old to escape apartheid. When I was growing up in Montreal, I encountered a lot of racism, and it made me feel that I did not belong. I never was able to feel comfortable, and it was very difficult for me to talk to my father about what was going on for me, because my parents had made huge sacrifices. It was very difficult to leave, to come to a country that was new. What I was experiencing was, of course, not the staggering racism of South Africa, but nonetheless, I was still encountering a lot of "you don't belong here." I was coded as both Jewish and black, and the Jewish part was, well, you're a Christ killer, but we can fix that, we can convert you to Christianity. But the black part was, you're not really quite human, you're not the same as or as good as the rest of us. So I spent my childhood thinking about these questions and what does it mean to belong. And when I grew up, I became an academic. I teach diaspora studies. Actually, I was teaching diaspora studies at the University of Toronto, and thinking about how do we create a socially just, diverse society. So how do we create a society that is socially just, that works for everybody, that makes everybody feel included, where nobody feels left out? And that's been sort of my life's work, to do research, to think, to write, and to teach about these kinds of subjects. So a couple of years ago, I actually got tired of doing research that kept showing me how deep systemic racism, including Islamophobia, is in this country, and I wanted to do something about it. There are people working in the public sector, in the government sector. There are people working in not-for-profits. The private sector has done some stuff, but it hasn't been very effective. So I decided that that's where I wanted to focus my work. So I started to prepare to work for boards of directors and senior management of private companies to help them figure out how to get rid of the Islamophobia and the racism from their organizations.
That's great.
That's going to make their organizations more successful, more profitable, and of course it's good for people who want to get jobs and rise within the organizations. So that's what I was doing when I got approached by the NDP in November and asked if I would run for
So
office.
have you been involved with the politics?
I've never been involved with politics, and I never thought I would be involved with politics. I've been very involved with social justice work, with public speaking and working, doing online work, supporting communities, working against Islamophobia, working against racism in the community, in various communities.
So you know the issues and you are quite aware of the situation.
I'm very familiar with the issues, but I had never thought of politics. And my initial response was, I'm not a politician. But then I realized that this was actually a really interesting opportunity to be able to talk about the need for systemic change. So how do we change the systems and the institutions so they work for everyone? And that's why I stepped up to do this.
Oh, thank you very much. And what about the riding that,
So yes. So, and I should also mention, so that I was born into a Jewish family, and again, I'm biracial. But about 5 years ago, I embraced Islam. So I've been Muslim for about 5 years, and my Muslim faith practice is very important to me. So the riding is an interesting one. It's a long, skinny riding. It goes from the lake to north of O'Connor to pretty much the Don Valley Parkway, and then Victoria Park roughly on one side and Coxwell on the other. It's socioeconomically very diverse. It's ethnically and racially very diverse. And so it faces a lot of issues that are really encapsulated by what I mean when I say that society just isn't working for all of us, and we have to fix it so that it is.
Mm-hmm, great. So it seems since you are contesting for election, so from this riding, so what are the issues or problems you have identified or your party has identified which needs to be addressed with care?
Yeah, so there are a lot of people in this riding who are really struggling. I mean, people are they're running into those barriers that I was talking about, those systemic barriers when folks come to Canada and are having trouble finding work, sometimes because they're newcomers, but sometimes because they're second generation and they're people of color or they're Muslim identified because of how they dress or how they wear their beards or their names. They have trouble finding work. So those barriers are definitely there. People are struggling with issues like childcare. They're struggling with issues like affordable housing. They're struggling with issues like transportation and hydro bills and insurance rates. And definitely everybody is struggling with the healthcare system. So folks right now, not everybody has access to insurance programs that allow them to get their teeth fixed. Not everybody has insurance, has benefits that allow them to afford to take their medications. And as we know, hospitals are full of people lined up in hallways. So everybody is facing these sorts of problems. The other big issue, of course, is education.
I think we'll come to the education and other issues as well. But
these are the kinds of issues that people are struggling with.
Often talk about,
and there are folks in the riding who are reasonably well off, but even they can see that other people are struggling with these issues. So even they understand the system's just broken. Okay,
thank you very much. I think the other important issue, I think many people, they ask us about that issue is domestic violence. Even only in January 2018, in this year, 5 women have been killed in domestic violence. And I have a figure here that according to the Department of Justice, it is estimated that each year Canada spends $7.4 billion to deal with the aftermath of spousal violence alone. So what is your party's position, NDP, thinking about it, or do you have any specific plan to stop domestic violence?
So here's the thing. My understanding of the figures is that a woman is killed by her current or former partner every 13 days in Ontario, and on average.
One in every 13 days.
Yes, and one every 6 days on average in Canada. So obviously, and that doesn't cover that. The actual femicide is only the worst part of it, because obviously domestic violence happens, or gender-based violence happens every day. Often it's not as bad as it doesn't as dire as murder, but nonetheless, any form of violence is obviously bad. It's really important for us to understand that this is a problem that is extremely complex and has to be tackled in multiple ways. And there is at the very root of it, I guess we need to tackle the culture of what's sometimes called toxic masculinity, or the idea that men have to feel that they own and control the women in their lives, and that they have the right to do that. So that's sort of at the root of the issue that needs to be tackled. But along the way to the education, obviously education therefore is a critical part of it. But along the way, while that's happening, we also have to support women in many, many ways.
Definitely.
So clearly there need to be shelters for women to go to, and those need to be well funded. There need to be programs which that are mental health related, that programs that help to support women while they're in the process of getting out of abusive and difficult relationships. We also need supports for children when they've experienced something, either just because they've been watching something happen between their parents. And we need to understand that this is an issue that affects all communities. It is not an issue that is endemic to any one group of people or any particular. It is all communities are affected by this, so we have to take a very broad view of it. But the other question is we need to understand how we need to be able to support women when they're thinking about leaving a relationship. So we need to ensure a lot of precarious work is held by women. We need to, for instance, things like the minimum wage being $15 an hour is really important, so that a woman can afford to leave a relationship even if she's a woman who is not wealthy. We need to make sure there's affordable health care, so that and affordable childcare, so that she isn't relying
These
on
are
a partner.
related, yeah, in many ways.
But they're very related, because
That's
if you're a woman who's in a difficult situation, you can't leave if your partner pays your childcare.
That's right.
So we need to ensure that these social determinants, if you will, of independence are there, so that a woman can make those healthy choices.
So these are the programs you are talking about. These are already included in your NDP?
So the issue is that those are the kinds of things that we have to be aware of. And to be fair, the government in place has done a really good job of thinking about these things. There is a roundtable on domestic violence in place, and the stuff that they're working towards is absolutely fantastic. So I think it's really important to continue to build on those things and to ensure that women have those supports.
And you mentioned about the childcare, one of the important issue.
Yeah.
The childcare in Ontario is without.
Right now it's through the roof.
Expensive, yeah, through the roof, and many people they can't afford it. So
can't afford it, and they're paying mortgages, like entire extra mortgages. So the platform that the NDP has is really wonderful and progressive. It would be for universal childcare, and to build a whole bunch of new childcare spaces to ensure that they are affordable and that they're not for profit. And if a family is earning under $40,000, the childcare is free. And then after that, it's on average $12
But
a day.
when you're saying that childcare, what does it mean? It means that daycare, or
Yes.
what are the other? It's the daycare,
yes.
basically the daycare.
Correct.
So those who are under 40,000 annual
free.
income,
It would be
for them
free.
the daycare is free. if they
Correct.
have- Okay, that's a good one. So you also mentioned about the education. So I have some figures here as well, that school maintenance has been unfunded for many years. Long wait list for the special education support. Those who need extra support, there's an issue. Student poverty is one of the important issue that many people have mentioned to us, or they're talking about it. Lack of good nutrition. Even I have visited a number of schools. They say that the nutrition is an issue. There are a number of pockets, which some of them are in this riding as well. And unequal access to learning materials, particularly computer, unequal allocation of resources. these are the issues quite often talked in the community. People often, express their concern. So how you are planning to bring the equity into this education system? How will you address these issues?
Yeah, I'm so glad you've raised this, because equity is absolutely critical in education. If you don't bring equity into education, then it's really difficult to have the kids catch up, and the rest of society to catch up. So number one, there is also the fact that schools are falling apart. And partly because of that funding formula that you talked about, that's really problematic. So what we're going to do is to take a good look and fix the funding formula, to spend the money to ensure that the schools can be fixed, and then to ensure, again, it is really a question of, particularly in the early years, making sure that class sizes aren't too big. And then I think it's really important to support those equity-based efforts that school boards are making. So there are people, for instance, in the Toronto District School Board, there is a superintendent for equity, anti-racism and anti-oppression who has been working extremely hard to ensure that all schools function from a perspective that is child-based and community-based. So what does the child need? And so on. So I think it's really important to support those initiatives. The other question about poverty in schools is a really important one, but it is also a deeper issue than just education, right? So if you have to look at it in terms of the bigger question, how do you ensure that parents have access to affordable childcare, that their hydro rates aren't too high, that they can afford their housing? And once you get those things into line, then they can afford the nutrition that their kids need as well, and they're not struggling to feed their kids and making choices between feeding their kids or keeping them in daycare or paying their hydro bills and having the lights turned off. So it's those, you want to have the systemic fixes in place so that parents have more access to the food they need for their kids.
Thank you very much. Viewers, you are watching Catch Up on Radio Metro Mail. We are talking to Rima Berns. She has got a nomination from NDP, New Democratic Party. Her riding is Beaches and East York. Now, I'd like to raise one other important issue that you have indicated about that health. So when we talk about health, we always talk about that overflowing emergency wards, long waiting time, and insufficient number of beds, long-term care. All are the issues very important for the community, because when they go to the hospital, they see the condition of the hospital or the waiting time that really bothers them in many ways. So what is your plan or your party's plan to support on these hospitals so that they can provide necessary services on time?
Yeah, I'm so glad you've asked that. I mean, healthcare is so, as you say, so absolutely critical. And we're facing a situation now where because of years of chronic underfunding of the healthcare system and the hospital system, people are indeed lined up in hallways, which nobody can get better when they're in a hallway. They can't even sleep. It's not dignified to be shunted into a hallway and lined up like sausages. It's a terrible, terrible situation. And the other issue is that often people who don't have access to benefits can't afford to get their teeth fixed, can't afford to get their children's teeth fixed, can't afford to take their medication. So sometimes they just don't take it, or they cut the medication in half, or they don't get their teeth fixed, which ends up causing enormous pain. And so people end up then in the emergency ward because they haven't taken their medication, or they've got abscesses in their mouths. That's not healthy. That's not how you keep a healthy population. And that's not cost effective, so it doesn't make sense.
At the end of the day, you're spending more.
Exactly. At the end of the day, you're spending more. So, again, what I love about the NDP platform is that it's taking a systemic approach to all of these issues. It's like, we can't keep underfunding our healthcare system. We can't keep having people who can't afford to get their teeth fixed and can't afford to take their medication. So let's just absolutely fix that. So the NDP is going to make those investments in healthcare, in doctors, in the hospitals, to ensure that we can take care of patients properly. People won't be lined up in hospitals any longer, and there will be dental care for everybody and pharmacare for everybody, so people can afford
free,
to take
right?
their
That's
medications.
right.
Yeah.
That's good. Viewers, that we have learned two things. That one is the child care is free for those families having 40,000 annual income, right? And even they are saying that the NDP, they have put that issue in their agenda as well, that pharmacare for everyone.
Pharmacare for everyone and dental care for everyone.
Dental
Yeah.
care.
And in fact, the East End Community Health Centre, which is on Queen Street and serves a lot of folks in the community who can't afford to access dental care otherwise, is going to have a dental clinic right there, and the operational costs for the dental clinic paid for as well.
Okay, thank you, great. So you mentioned something about the affordable housing. I think we often talk about the affordable housing, but do you or your party, I mean NDP, do they have really very specific plan for this affordable housing?
They do have a very specific plan. So part of it is about making sure that current housing stock is in good repair, which it isn't at the moment. So making sure that that's funded properly, because sometimes people are housed in housing that doesn't feel like home, because it badly needs repairs, and then that's not safe, dignified housing. That doesn't feel like home. So fixing those existing public housing units is really important, as well as building more and investing in co-ops and so on, and then making sure that inclusive zoning is really inclusive. So making sure that developers don't take advantage of loopholes in order to cut out the inclusive part of inclusive zoning. So there are very definitely steps that can be taken to make sure that housing is more affordable, and those are ones that the party is absolutely intent on making.
Thank you. So you have mentioned a number of things which will somehow or in many ways will also address the issue of poverty.
Yes.
But we have seen that in huge number of families, I mean almost 13.4 Ontario families are living in poverty. So apart from all these things you have mentioned, do you have any other specific plan that or how you are planning to assist these low income
For sure. So, I mean, I think it's really important to understand that poverty is the result of other factors. Poverty isn't itself the problem. The problem is the systems that lead to poverty. And if you don't understand it that way, you will always be throwing band-aids at poverty, and you will never be fixing the problem. The problem is, why do you have communities that continue to live in poverty? What is going on to cause that? And then how do you fix those systems? So and I think that the NDP platform, why I'm excited about it is that it is doing a good job of getting at the root of so many of those things. People live in poverty because they can't afford, because they've had precarious jobs where the wages have been too low, where they can't afford housing and their childcare has been too high.
They don't have a permanent job as well.
And they don't have a permanent job, sometimes because they can't get a permanent job because of the way that they observe their faith, or because of their names, or the color of their skin. So if you don't go back to tackling the systemic racism and the systemic Islamophobia, you can't alleviate some of those issues. So it is about things like childcare and housing and transportation and hydro, but it is also about tackling that systemic racism and Islamophobia. Okay, so if you are elected, so what would be your priority for initial first year? So I'm hoping, inshallah, the party is elected, because then we can actually work on all of these things. But as you know, what happens in the system is that each MPP is elected, and if enough of them form the government, then the party is elected as a whole. As an individual, I am absolutely intent on continuing to push forward the idea that we always have to think systemically, always. And we have to think methodically about how do we fix the underlying problem, so that we're not just throwing a few more dollars at them from the top. Do you understand what I mean? So again, the other thing that is really important to me that will be important to me as an MPP is to ensure that communities that have been left out of the policy making system, communities that are not fully included in the political system, be brought in, that the political parties themselves become much more diverse and inclusive, because that way you're going to end up with much more equitable public policy making.
I think inclusion is a very important thing, because
critical.
People are coming into this country from across the world, different. So inclusion is very important.
And I also just want to add to that inclusion is important, but it's also really important that it be meaningful inclusion.
Definitely.
So it's not just like come in and sit at the table and then let me ignore you. It's like come in like
active inclusion.
Active inclusive.
That's good.
Meaningful inclusion.
Thank you very much. So as I told you earlier, that most of our viewers, they are from different countries. It's because we are online, and basically we are targeting Bangladeshi Canadian or Canadian Bangladeshi. Yes. So do you have any specific message? Because in this writing there are good number of Bangladeshi Canadians. So if you have any specific message, so you can share that.
I do. So I have a couple of things. One of the things I didn't get a chance to talk about is that another thing that's really important is to ensure that young people don't have debt when they graduate from university, and also that there are more spots for them in trades and in so that they can take apprenticeship kind of positions. I'm actually going to look specifically at the language here, because I think that this is really important. So one of the things that we're going to do is invest $57 million to create opportunities in trades, just to create more meaningful, well-paying jobs for young people. 27,000 co-op jobs for students, and local jobs through higher local provisions. So I think all of these things are important in terms of helping people get a foot up into the economy. I also think, again, that for me, fighting Islamophobia is an absolutely critical part of what I see my job being. And I will be the first Muslim MPP to be elected from this riding. So inshallah, I will be able to represent you all very well. Please make dua for me. That would be
wish inshallah. You good luck from Radio Metro Mail as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank
and we
you.
really appreciate that your time and everything.
It's been such an honor. Thank you so very much.
Viewers, you are watching Catch Up on Radio Metro Mail. If you live in this riding, Beaches and East York, it's very simple process. You make sure that you go for voting. So you cast your vote, don't forget. So there are a number of ways you can cast your vote. If you want to know detail about it, so you can go to the Ontario election website and you can see that. So thank you very much for watching our program, and keep watching our program, listening to our radio, and thank you very much for joining us here today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.